Hi, this is Kara from the Special Needs Mom podcast.
And this is Angela from Especially Organized, Sensible Solutions for Special Needs Moms.
We have this heart for special needs moms. And so we thought, you know what, let's combine forces. And we have come up with what we're calling the Purge Party. And you can pretty much guess what it is. It's a party where we're going to come together and we're going to purge, or in general, accomplish a goal, a small goal together. So we have set this for January 27th, starting at 8 o'clock for my Pacific Coast people.
Which means 11 o'clock for all of you on the East Coast. So this is an opportunity. If you have something on your to-do list that has just been stuck there and you are wanting to move it up on the list, you're wanting to tackle, maybe it's a space or an area of your home or a category in your home that has just needed a little time and attention. This is your opportunity for you to be online with us while you work and have access for us to help you answer your questions, help guide you, and just serve you for those 2 hours.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you can tell like what we've designed is just this very high level of support for that project that you just haven't been able to tackle on your own. The thing that we are envisioning is that you get to leave this purge party feeling so accomplished because you did the thing. You started the year off getting that thing done that you were stuck on last year. And so it's a momentum builder, if you will. You can go ahead and sign up. We have a link ready for you. And we are offering this for $40 for the whole experience.
Absolutely. And we hope you'll join us. I think it's going to be really fun. It's going to be a great group of moms of special needs kids. So we all get each other. We all have an understanding of what it's like to have something on our to-do list, but just we haven't been able to tackle it yet. So I hope that you will join us. We're super excited to bring this to you, and we are thrilled to work with you.
All right. We'll see you all there. Hi, I'm Kara Riska, life coach, wife, and the mother of 4 incredible and unique kids. It wasn't all that long ago that my son received a diagnosis that had my world come crashing down. I completely lacked the ability to see past the circumstances, which felt impossible, and the dreams I once had for my life and family felt destroyed. Fast forward past many years of surviving and not at all thriving, and you'll see a mom who trusts that she can handle anything that comes her way and has access to the power and grace that once felt so completely lacking. I started the Special Needs Mom podcast to create connection and community with moms who find themselves up against what feels impossible. My intention is to spark the flare of possibility in your own life and rekindle the dreams that you hold impossible now. This isn't a podcast about your special needs child. This is a podcast about you. If you're a mom who feels anxious, alone, or stuck, then you are in the right place. Welcome. Well, hello there, and welcome back to the Special Needs Mom podcast. I am Kara Riska, and I am so glad you're here. I absolutely loved this interview. It still makes me laugh a little bit on how quickly my guest and I jumped into deep, heartfelt, vulnerable conversation. Interview went entirely differently than I expected. And I expected it to go great, but it also went entirely more amazing than I expected. Let me tell you about our guest, Joya Van Der Laan. She's a wife, she's a mother of 3. She's also a family nurse practitioner, a functional medicine specialist, and a business owner. So you get the idea. This woman is busy. 2 of her 3 children have special needs, which include Autism Spectrum Disorder, ADHD, and IED, Intermittent Explosive Disorder. After receiving her daughter's ASD diagnosis in 2014, when she was just 3 years old, Joya's innate curiosity and passion for learning drove her to ask the question, am I doing enough to help my children? Feeling woefully unprepared, even with her medical training, Joya started researching and jumping into action. It was overwhelming and eye-opening, yet hopeful and exhausting all at the same time. Joya and her husband Dave started Your Autism Game Plan, which is an online resource for parents and caregivers of children with ASD. Her goal is to provide a different perspective, including the integrative treatment options that are not generally discussed in the traditional medical and therapy settings. I think especially after you hear this interview, you will be inspired to connect with her and to be part of her community. Not only is her voice super soothing and just exudes like she knows what she's doing, which just feels really good to be with, she is just such a light and somebody who is inspiring in the way that she is approaching both her life as a mom, but also what she is using her giftings and her expertise in to help the community of special needs children. Let's get into this interview. I know you're going to love it. All right, Joya, welcome to the show. I am so glad to have this conversation with you today.
Thanks. I'm so happy you had me on.
Yeah, and she just told me, her husband just told me that he's actually the one that emailed to get her on the show. So like, look at that partnership. Look at you guys go.
Solid teamwork.
And we'll get more into a little bit about your business later. And obviously I've told my listeners a little bit about who you are and what you're doing. Absolutely. But why don't you tell us in your own words, a little bit about who you are as a mom of special needs children?
Ooh, that's a big question. I am trying my best to be a patient and loving and knowledgeable mom, and that doesn't always happen the way I would like it.
This is the best answer I think I've ever gotten as far as intro. I'll be like, I am trying my best. I love that. Okay, keep going. I will not interrupt.
That's fine. I am a perfectionist and I like to do things well. And so a big part of this special needs journey has been frustration because I can't perfect this. I can't always do this. Even if I'm doing things well, then it doesn't mean that my child is going to be responding well to what I'm doing. So it's been a big learning curve of I may be doing things perfectly and still my child may not respond like other children or like I want them to. So there's been a big humbling process, I think, in all of this special needs parenting, learning to deal with frustration, learning to deal with grief, major grief, right? This was not the child I expected to have, the life I expected to have. And there's a lot of guilt, I think, involved as well. I had done everything I thought I could to make my children healthy and well. I was eating well and exercising well and taking the right supplements and, all these things. I was avoiding certain things in order that my children would be, quote, normal and healthy. So there's a lot of guilt over that. And then there's a lot of guilt for feeling like I got gypped a bit, right? Like I got the short end of the stick. There's a lot of guilt over that. I should be thankful for my kids because I have kids and so many people struggle, or I have kids and so many people have it worse than I have it. But I think I've also come to acknowledge it's okay to feel how you feel.
Yeah. This reminds me of, I did a whole episode on, I'm trying to remember what I called it. Something like the deathly grips of pain comparison, because I see this so often is that we mix up gratitude for actually comparison.
Yes.
It's like gratitude is not, I should be grateful for. Like, that's not gratitude, my friends. That's actually guilt.
Yes.
Or judgment, actually. It's guilt or judgment.
It's
horrible because it
feels terrible.
Sometimes I feel like, and actually some people have pushed me back a little bit. They're like, well, it does help. And I'm like, okay, well, like, so does drinking a bottle of wine. Like, that also helps.
Also do that. Maybe not a whole bottle.
But we limit it to a couple of glasses. No. Yeah, so things can help, but they still, it also sometimes can be masking. Like, it's not really experiencing the full spectrum of what's there. It's kind of covering. It's like tamping down and like trying to keep it at bay, because I think we're actually very afraid of what's underneath that surface in terms of anger and grief. And I was just listening to a podcast this morning. I will link to it on the show because it's my new favorite podcast. And I'm trying to think of the name of it. It's called The Place We Find Ourselves. And this
Okay.
is by a pastor counselor and therapist. And he just he was so the episode I was listening to this morning was about our coming to grips with the anger that we have at God for our stories. And I don't know your faith background, but
I'm with you so far. Very
yeah, but I like that. That's a good answer. But for me, it was very like, so I was running while I was listening to this podcast, and it was really interesting just looking at my journey of anger through the stages. And so, our diagnosis for new listeners, so my son is a survivor of brain tumor back in 2011. And so he's 11 now. And so we've been living this life for what is it, 11 years? No, that's not the right math. That 9 years. Can do this. And I have three other children. And so, and I'll add, I don't always add it, but then, and a miscarriage between my third and fourth child, a really late term miscarriage that was obviously, I mean, it's always devastating. However, this added to my grievances with God. And my story was like, if you're good, then like, why are you so mean? And so I really just look back at my, probably this is like more like in 2000, it was like 5 years after like the diagnosis and kind of surviving, that I really was just like, nah, like I'm good. Like I don't really want you if you're going to be like so mean about this. Like if you're not going to hear, like, look at this child and like, why would you ever? And so whether it's a brain tumor diagnosis or having a child that's neurologically different that you see struggling in this world, I think it really asks us to be a little bit angry. And I guess we kind of went real deep, real fast on this, which I appreciate, but I invite everybody to really examine our anger for the situations that we find ourselves in and actually give ourselves permission to go all in.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
again, I will link to this particular podcast because it's been so valuable for me. He talks about praying the Psalms, which the Psalms are essentially like people being real angry and being like, this is not okay. And then
Out. Why?
gripping with that, but then at the end coming back and kind of saying, like, acknowledging, like, okay, like it's okay, like I get it now. And so there's a couple particular episodes about that I think would be really, really valuable for this community. And so anyhow, so
Well, I think this is a thing worth conversing about because faith is so affected by having a child with special needs. I absolutely have struggled. I grew up Christian, right? That has been my life. So I never had a life without God or not knowing God. Certainly peaks and valleys along the way. And certainly this special needs journey has caused, I would say, deeper peaks and deeper valleys and higher peaks than anything else in my life. And I think the same emotional experience, right? Having kids and especially having kids with special needs causes you to feel deeper angst, deeper pain, deeper sorrow, but also way deeper joy and, just rejoicing and just fun. So I think it's really broadened me emotionally, spiritually, in some really good ways, in some extremely uncomfortable ways.
I think that is so well said. And I really relate to the deeper peaks and then the higher, I guess it's the deeper valleys and the higher peaks. And I think, and also like I would just want to speak to anybody that feels like they're still in that valley, that's okay. Like
And
that
God is always
there will be a peak, and that your situation may not change. So your child may not heal, their condition may not improve, but I do believe that there still is the opportunity to have the experience of then that peak.
Yes.
Of God meeting you and you being there.
A sermon that I had once listened to said it really well, and this has stuck with me, and I will have to look back at who this actually was. But he had a sermon series on pray your fears, pray your tears. God wants to be with us and is with us during these hard times, in addition, of course, to the joyful times. But it very often feels to us like God is absent when we are struggling. Because again, we tell ourselves if we're struggling, that must mean God is not there.
Agreed. Yeah.
But I mean, of course, God is there. Look at Job. That would be the prime example, right? But like all these characters throughout the Bible, look how much the Israelites struggled in the desert for 40 years. And God was there with them through it all. And now we know that, right? Retrospectively, it's much easier to see, I think, than when you're experiencing it as well.
So true. And yeah, that's why this podcast, I'm just like in love with it, because it talks about all these stories, and really kind of as we continue to kind of these stories and really normalizing and giving permission to the outpouring of anger at God. I think that this is not really, I know my experience growing up as Christian, it was not taught and it was not modeled. And so therefore we conclude that it's not okay.
Yeah.
And I think that that not okayness then keeps us very stuck as we're trying to keep this beach ball underwater of our anger, of this experience that we have, which now is parenthood. And it doesn't just affect us, it affects those closest to our heart. And so I think especially in this area of being especially mom, it just hits so deeply, so deeply.
Yes. Well, and I think I find myself also being jealous of those parents or even special needs parents who have the outward attitude anyways of God is good even in this, I can feel God. I trust God. I pray every day, and this has never made my faith stronger. And that has not been my experience. And I'm funny. I'm a little jealous and sad about that. Like, God, why aren't you like making me feel your presence here right now in this hard time? And you're like helping her along. Is it my fault?
I guess I'm so judgmental that I'm like, I don't buy it. I don't buy it that you're all peaches and roses.
Like God has blessed me, and this is only a blessing. This hardship, it's just a blessing. And I'm like, oh, I can't.
I like that. You're like, I'm not quite there yet. I don't know that even like there's a tone that comes with it, like, oh, it's all blessings and all good. I think this is partially my how shall I say this? Partially my little bit of not liking Christian, a lot bit of not liking Christian culture, right? So it's a beautiful faith, and obviously it's the faith I've chosen, and church is kind of weird, and people are people and all that, and so we've kind of made it into this culture versus actually this relationship with who we call God. And so that's the part where I'm like, I'm good. I don't necessarily, it doesn't feel good for me actually. And the experience that I've had in being in my pain in connection with people it's been something that I've had to really like forgive for, and really allow humanity for people not knowing how to be there for me in these times where I was a little bit like, no, God is not feeling very good right now.
Right. Well, and then to have people, at church, or if it's a Christian therapist or whoever it is, to say, just give all your troubles to him, just like release it to God. I'm like, what does that even mean?
I love it.
I don't know how to do that. Like, I can pray about it. I don't really feel like praying, many times if I'm angry. Let's be honest. But what does that even mean? Give it to God? Like, let God strengthen you? I mean, I don't know. I'm a very concrete person. And so I believe that God gives people strength. I believe it. I need to yet experience the fullness of that, I think.
And here's what's interesting. So I remember there was night after night when I would say like in the long hopeless phase of this journey, where the experience that we're having is, so I had a newborn baby. So I was 10 weeks pregnant when my son Levi got diagnosed with brain cancer. So that's not good timing. And my husband had just left his job with health insurance to be an independent contractor in the financial services world. So he was 100% commission at that time. And of course I was on disability now because I was full-time caring for my child, and I hadn't yet gone back to work. Actually, the full story is I was going to go back to work and then I got laid off, which was ultimately, I do believe, a gift from God, but it didn't feel like that at the time.
No.
Okay, so I'm laying in bed night after night thinking, how the heck are we going to pay for all the things that we now need to pay for on this reduced or zero income? And now we have, medical things are not cheap usually. So I think I was going to bed night after night, just being like, God, why would you give us all this at once? That's just mean. Like, give us brain cancer or give us financial problems. Like,
Right.
let's just do one or the other. And so I have this newborn baby. I have this child that is still is learning to walk again. And I mean, I won't go into all the things we were doing at that time, but so what I was thinking at night after night was like, yeah, like you're going to have to come to me. Like I'm mad. Like if you're so good, like I picture myself as like this child folded, like with her arms folded in her room, being like, no, like I'm not talking to you. Like this is not, no, like why would I?
Right.
And here's the thing is I can look back now at that. And I know that it felt really, it didn't feel good at the time. It felt like I knew I was being a bratty child, but I think in that pain, that's just all I could do. And I just stayed there. I
Yes.
stayed there for a long time. I was alone and I stayed there for a long time. And eventually, and actually it was through a sermon at church where the person was talking about being able to be grateful along with suffering. And actually that your suffering doesn't have to go away to actually be grateful. That I was like, oh, it doesn't have to be, I have to be grateful for my son lived. Cause I was thankful for that, but it wasn't enough for me to be like, well, thanks God. And so it really, that kind of like ignited for me the idea that I guess ultimately that God was still good. Cause that was essentially what I was questioning.
Yeah. Well, and I think, knowing that God is good, it's one thing to know it in your head,
Yes.
and it's
Yes.
another to feel it in your heart. And I think that a lot of what I experience with faith has been so cerebral in terms of especially how I was raised and that kind of thing, and less heart. And so I think even as a grown up, I need to have more of the heart in addition to the knowledge and the brain. I know what faith is, but that heart piece to me feels like the faith that I want more.
I love that you brought that up. And I feel like that's kind of like my life in a summary. It's like I know a lot of things, but actually feeling them and dropping down into that heart center is just something that for a lot of reasons I thought I resisted for a long time.
I will say, I always feel like there must be some lesson that God is trying to teach me through these struggles, right? That's kind of a lot of what we hear in the Bible, like, and then they
Totally.
lesson, and now, they're back on track with God. And I'm like, God, like, just show me what you're trying to teach me. I will learn it. I promise. Just show me so we can get through this. And it doesn't work that way.
I am so glad you brought that up because I totally relate to that. And I feel like that actually, I don't know that I was remembering that part kind of my journey, just to be like, again, like, God, like, what am I missing? That was the thing I kept being like, what am I missing? Like, why? What am I so blind to that you have me in this place that you want me to learn this lesson? Like, let's just learn it already. Like, I'm broken. I don't know that I can get much more broken. Teach me. Which I don't know, like I'm clearly not a theologian, but I'm thinking that it's probably a very big misconception of like how we relate to God, that it's like he's trying to like bend our arm to teach us this lesson. I'm thinking that's not it. And actually, I'm going to put a plug in for the episode that actually released today. So, which is, what is it? It's February 11th. So this episode that we're recording is not going to be out till I think mid-March. But if you're listening to this now and you haven't listened to the self-loved episode, it's not the same as this conversation, but I do talk about the experience of self-love, especially in the church and the misconceptions of it. And I call it self-loved because I'm looking at it that that's the foundation that we're coming to, that because we are loved, then we can love ourselves. And it's really a conversation about us being able to fully love ourselves so that we can show up for these kids. Because as you know, Joya, loving these kids, and it's funny, we haven't even talked about, I know nothing about your kids, which is kind of fun because the details matter less than the experience of having to love somebody that's not maybe how we want them to be. That's maybe not how we expected them to be. But then as their mom, wanting to love them unconditionally, it does ask a lot. And I think it starts with us having that relationship with ourselves.
Yes. And it's interesting to hear you say like loving a child who is not how you expect or not who you expect. For me, that's definitely it. There's an additional piece though. So Sophie, my 9-year-old, has autism, was diagnosed with autism. And it's more like an Asperger's, what they used to call Asperger's type of thing. Very, very verbal, highly intelligent in lots of ways, but also deficits in things like social interaction and nonverbal communication and, outbursts and behaviors and that sort of thing. So she was diagnosed at 3, and now she's 9. So we've been dealing with this for 6 years. And over the years, there have been different struggles. And, sometimes I wish for the struggles of the 3-year-old Sophie versus the 9-year-old struggles that we're dealing with now. But it's interesting because, about loving your child, right? Like, of course, the motherly instinct is to love your child. And of course, I nursed this child and I did the best for her. And, I bonded with her and I parented very intentionally and still try to parent intentionally, although it's getting harder. But one of the struggles that I've had is to love a child who is difficult to love at times because she can be nasty and disobedient and embarrassing. Like she called. So we send her to like an e-learning camp once a week when she's not in physical school. She called this like big burly coach at this Western place. She called him a very nasty word that I have never uttered out of my own mouth. And I don't know where she heard it, but that kind of thing, like, who are you? You're a 9-year-old. Like, this is awful. Why? So to love a child like that, I feel like I have not mastered fully.
I have not mastered. Well, yes, because so my son has, actually, I want to ask you about this diagnosis I see on your bio, Intermittent Explosive Disorder. What is that?
I didn't really know before this all happened. So
because I'm like, I think we might have that, but there's like not a diagnosis. Here's what's weird. So my son's very explosive, impulsive, and I feel like it's one of those things where I wish there was like, oh, he has this, because then it validates like the extremeness of it. Because I feel like, I also have typical kids and like, yeah, they explode too and they break things too. But like, we're talking like black and white as far as like the levels and the frequency and all that.
Friends too, who are like, oh yeah, my kid does that too. And you're like, do they though?
To the point where like I think some of my friends, like I talked to them about it, but then they've even commented, and I appreciated this, that they said, wow, until I saw that, like I didn't really understand like how, oh, you weren't exaggerating. And I'm not known to be like an exaggerator, but I think it's like some things in life, like you just can't see it or can't believe it till you see it. So tell me about this diagnosis.
So Jude is 7.5, and he's one of twins. So he's boy and girl twins, 7 years old, Emily and Jude. And Jude's always been kind of intense. And again, I did everything with them. These twins nursed until they were 3. Okay. So like, and that's like,
wow.
I did.
That's how we know how deep you dig.
I sacrificed for you. And, gluten-free, dairy-free, the whole healthy granola mom. Okay. So, but this intermittent explosive disorder, he has always been kind of an intense child, very energetic, running at 10 months old. Okay. So This is kind of what we were preparing ourselves for. Always very smart, but always kind of tricky and funny and like kind of the class clown type of personality. So, okay, that's okay for a while when they're young, but then, we're getting calls from the school, he hit a little boy or, these calls, and you're like, okay, well, is he just a boy or is this something more? And, part of you wants to be like, oh, it's fine. He's just got all this extra energy. And part of you wants to be like, well, I don't want to miss something if this needs to be addressed. So finally, we did take him in for an evaluation, and sure enough, okay, ADHD and this intermittent explosive disorder, IED. So, and it is basically what it sounds like. And even as a family nurse practitioner, I don't know if this diagnosis didn't exist when I was training, or if it did and it just is kind of so subspecialized that we didn't, learn extensively about it. But that is what it kind of sounds like. Now there's a component of ADHD that includes, right, like these kids are impulsive and they have trouble controlling their impulses and managing feelings and that kind of thing, which definitely is how he behaves many times. But I think having it be validated that what we're experiencing is beyond the normal impulse control issues of a 7-year-old boy was really validating, because that tells me I'm not a bad mom, that it's not something that I'm doing or not doing that is causing this to be the case. Like, we are, if I may say so myself,
and you may,
consistent parents. We are very consistent parents. We are not the parents to be like, oh, you're throwing a tantrum. Okay, just whatever you want, just calm down. We are not those parents. There are consequences in our house, and I feel like we run a pretty orderly house, at least by appearances from the outside, right? But so it gave me validation that I wasn't off base. And that what I was experiencing with him was something significant, rather than just me kind of being a sissy about it or me making a big deal out of nothing. So we haven't tried medications or anything with him yet. For now, what we're doing is, and because I kind of like, I'll use the term granola, because I'm kind of more granola about life in general. That's also how I approach, any sort of diagnosis or disorder. And so for Jude, what it's been is, like, for instance, zinc supplementation, B vitamin supplementation. We've done a sleep study for him because his sleep is off. And I literally just got off the phone with the sleep specialist a couple hours ago saying, the results from his blood work came back. Oh, actually, he's anemic. So his ferritin iron levels are low and his vitamin D levels are very low. And that can contribute to poor sleep. Okay, well, let's ask adults a question. If you get poor sleep, how's your impulse control?
Yes, right.
Yeah. So, part of what I love to do as a mom, but I think it stems from my background as a healthcare provider, as a nurse practitioner, is what is the root of this problem? The root of this problem might not be your brain is wired differently, although it might be. But what if we solve your sleep issues? If you sleep better, are your behavior issues going to get better? And the answer has to be yes, right? At least in part. Is it going to cure the ADHD? Is it going to cure the IED? Maybe not. But looking at root causes to help our kids however we can is so important. And most of us, especially if you're not in the medical field, have no idea even what questions to ask, or that there are these questions to ask. Because what we're told is, okay, your child has ADHD. Well, here are the medications and here's the therapy that you need. And we're not often told, well, could it be a sleep issue, or could it be like a mineral imbalance or a vitamin deficiency of some sort, or maybe they're sensitive to a food that you have no idea about. So I don't know. I love the whys. I love knowing why and how things work. And so to me, digging for these root causes is sort of just part of who I am. And so that's why I do what I do.
Yeah, I totally am on the same wavelength as you with this. I feel like, because I know that I needed to like really double down on my own health and well-being. And I feel like I've done so much stuff as a result of having the children that I do, and like being like, I can't do this when I have migraine. So let's figure this out. And so I think I've thought, I was like, maybe I'm going to go, like, I don't want to be an acupuncturist, but I think it'd be really interesting to be trained as one. Cause I'm like, even right now, I'm like, my body hurts. Like, why are we so inflamed right now? I feel like I've done, like, if I listed off the things I've done to try to like deal with this, you'd be like, oh, you're trying, keep trying. But, what I wanted to ask is, why do you think that, let's call it Western medicine, only looks at this very small approach to supporting kids like ours?
Well, at the risk of sounding maybe a little bit cynical.
Let's do it.
Okay.
We already talked a lot about our cynical relationship with God. Let's go there with medicine too.
We're in it now. We're in it. So, I think it stems from our medical training. And I think what's behind that, a lot of what's behind that is some of the traditional research and who funds that research and where profits come from in our medical community. So again, I realize this may be simplifying it too much and oversimplifying it, but the drug companies have a profit to make. And so if there's a drug that can treat a disease, or if there's a disease that they have a drug for, then they will absolutely market that and you will absolutely hear about that. So that's one of the things. I think also because, as providers, we're not trained in integrative approaches, functional medicine, all these more natural things. And so I usually get one of two responses from providers and that patients tell me they've heard. It's either they're providers who aren't familiar with sort of integrative things will say, that's a bunch of baloney. Don't waste your time and money. That's not safe. It's not proven. There's no research, which is not true. Or they will say, and this is my preferred answer, you know what? I don't really know about that because that's not where my training is. But maybe I've had patients who've benefited from that, or you're welcome to look into it, or something like that, more of an open-minded thing. It bothers me when providers who don't know and who are an expert in it poo-poo it, because that's really shutting down a parent's interest in questions and kind of teaching them you don't matter, your opinion doesn't matter, and what you've read doesn't matter. And that really disempowers parents when really what we should be doing is empowering them to look for knowledge. And you're your child's best advocate. If you're not going to do this for them, then who is? Nobody's going to do it. So I think we need to empower parents more.
I like that. I think it gives good insight on kind of knowing how many medical appointments all of us that are listening to this podcast collectively do, really recognizing that we have the option of bringing our wisdom to those appointments, and then also having compassion for the doctors and the nurses and all the people that don't have the same knowledge that we do, and just recognizing they're doing the best they can.
They are, yes. It's not that they intend to do a bad job. Of course it's not. And they're not trying to do anything out of, malice or spite or, usually. But it's not their expertise. You wouldn't go to a medical doctor for acupuncture, even though that's kind of medical, right? But we don't expect them to be trained in that or have knowledge about that. If you're interested in that, if you want to know more about acupuncture treatments or herbal treatments or vitamin treatments, you go to somebody who specializes in that.
Yeah, I guess it just bums me out that all these modalities are not available via regular insurance, right? Because we've, of course, paid out of pocket. I know you know what like cranial sacral therapy is, and just from looking at your website and all the different things that I've done. Like I said, it's like a very long list. And I feel like I've learned so much, and I feel like it really like opens your eyes to be like, oh my gosh, our bodies are incredible in the way that they work, and the way that our mind, body, spirit is so integrated in everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then I get really super like, I guess probably a little like angry that like, it's like, oh, well, it's all out of pocket. It's like not even an option. Like, and actually our insurance, like you can get acupuncture treatment. Like they have a provider, but it's like, oh, but you have to pay for the cash. Like they recognize like, oh, okay, you can do that, but you just have to pay for that.
Well, and
on
it's
your
so
own.
nonsensical because if we would encourage this type of care more, the type of care where people are responsible for themselves more, go see a provider who's going to encourage you to exercise and have a good lifestyle and diet, those insurance companies would be making so much more money. Like, and really it does all come down to money. It does.
Yes.
And so I still haven't figured out the rationale for why insurance companies won't pay for this stuff, because it absolutely means that they'll have to fork out less in the tertiary, secondary and tertiary care, right? So if you just focus on preventative, you'll have to spend so much less on heart medicines and diabetes medicines, right? All this stuff. It seems like a no-brainer to me. Now, I'm not an insurance insider. It does confuse me and makes me a little bit upset as well.
Clearly you have a very extensive, broad knowledge as it comes to what we would call traditional or Western medicine. And you've obviously extended your knowledge base way beyond in effort of serving your own children.
Yes.
And I want to talk a little bit about kind of what you're doing with that, because my understanding is you're doing a lot. to now like push that out and to help other families and communities. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So um, this kind of loops back around to God, why are you doing this to me? Right. Okay. Well, maybe one of the reasons is so that I did have to be forced to learn about all of this in a different way to help my own kids. And now I'm able to help other people and hopefully, thousands or tens of thousands of other people with this. So that gives me a little bit of hope. I'll just start out by saying that. Since, 2018, I started my own medical practice. So here in Illinois, I see children, I see women. A big part of my practice is actually bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. But I also see now kids for various things like, ADHD, autism, constipation, which then, of course, there are all kinds of things that are associated with constipation, both precursors and then results of constipation, anything GI related. And then just this past October, my husband and I, my good partner, we launched a website called Your Autism Game Plan. And what we've been doing is every single week releasing a video, kind of just empowering parents to make their child's plan. So oftentimes parents are very confused, very overwhelmed. And that's how we felt at the beginning. And even now, sometimes when something new comes up, but we felt, even me as a nurse practitioner, a medically trained professional, and my husband, an attorney, so like very smart people, we felt so unprepared and so overwhelmed and so inundated with information and sometimes conflicting information and advice. And you Google these things or you look in the textbooks or wherever, do the research, and still there's conflicting information, conflicting evidence, depending on where you look. And it's like so much that you just end up being crippled or paralyzed. And you're like, I don't even know what to do, so I'm not going to do anything. Yeah. So for us, if we felt that way as medical and smart people, how in the world must other people felt? So that's kind of where this idea came from, is let's help people. Let's make it simple. Let's make it easily available, easily digestible for people at, not necessarily like 6th grade level reading, but, these parents, they're going to learn and they know a lot already. So we're coming out with videos. The thing that makes Your Autism Game Plan different from your typical, here's some help for your autistic child, for instance, is a lot of those websites are ABA focused, or the Applied Behavior Analysis Therapy. And although I'm not for or against that type of therapy, I know there's a lot of controversy over ABA. But what makes Your Autism Game Plan different is I focus more on these integrative therapies, these functional medicine therapies. And one of the reasons I do that is because, well, first, I believe in them. I truly believe they work. I've seen them work. I've seen them work in my kids and my patients, and I know that they are effective. They're not the only thing that's effective. Sometimes we have to use medications. And, do I think that OT and PT and therapies are absolutely beneficial? Yes, but there's more we can do if you know. The other thing is, it's, as we were talking about, it's so expensive to see these specialist providers. It's almost always going to be out of pocket. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? That's the way they have to run their business, because insurance will not pay them. They would go under and then they wouldn't be able to help anybody. So insurance doesn't pay for this stuff. So if I can provide information to parents on where to start. So like one of the things that I'm working on right now is a course that's going to be coming out in hopefully April, but life happens, but we will see, about just like where to start and what certain things can you do safely that are evidence-based, that are effective at home. Like maybe you can start some supplements, some safe supplements that are safe, that you don't have to pay somebody hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars for them to tell you, hey, why don't you start your child on magnesium? That is something you can do at home right now if you have a little bit of knowledge. And what I mean by that is, okay, I just told you start magnesium. So what are you going to do? You're going to go on Amazon and you're going to look at all the magnesium and go, oh my goodness, there are thousands of, where do I even start? I have no idea. Do I need magnesium oxide, glycinate, citrate, malate, threonate? There are tons of options.
I so get you right now because yes.
It's just not easy. And so I want to make it easy for people to help their kids before they have to spend these thousands of dollars. And you may have to spend that eventually, but if I can get people started, for instance, on, okay, gluten-free, dairy-free diet, give it a try. Magnesium and melatonin because your kid's not sleeping and they're constipated. Maybe your child needs, help with energy production. Maybe they need to be on B vitamins. They need help with methylation. Methylation's a whole.
I just learned about this actually. So I took my oldest son to I think he's a chiropractor, but I think I lovingly call him a witch doctor, but like affectionately, right? That's a compliment in my book. And he just taught me about methylation. And so yeah, I'm super interested. Yeah. Apparently, is it that we're not methylators? I think we're not methylators.
Correct. So up to like 60-70% of the population has this gene. It's called a SNP, single nucleotide polymorphism. And if you remember back to high school biology, where those two pieces of the DNA helix fit together, that something's missing, right? Something's wrong in one of those connections or more of those connections. And that's the DNA that programs our proteins and how our body works. So one of those things is the methylation gene. There's two main ones. There's two different MTHFR genes. And if you write those letters out, you can kind of like make a bad word out of those. People like to make jokes out of, but it's not necessarily a death sentence. Like I personally have those mutations and have dealt with it. And I'm a healthy person and I have had children and, they are arguably healthy. But methylation is so important for things like neurotransmitter production and processing, for DNA synthesis and repair, for detoxification, for processing of our hormones, especially estrogen. So this is really big for women. And in terms of my work, where bioidentical hormones come in. So important for eye health, for brain health, for gut health, for everything, right? Because it has to do with how our cells are repairing themselves and reproducing themselves. And so even in terms of cancer, for instance, if we have an error in the coding of how our cells are multiplying, well, that error in coding can lead to bad cells or cancer. So the methylation piece, is really, really important. And 60 to 70% of us are methylating at significantly reduced capacity. So that also has to do with things like I was mentioning, neurotransmitters. So mood, memory, cognition, behaviors, sleep, all these things. And then gut health, of course, comes into it too, right? The brain affects the gut and the gut affects the brain. So if your gut intestines are not healthy because of an overgrowth of yeast, for instance, or because of food sensitivities that are causing inflammation, or because of constipation, then the production and transmission of your neurotransmitters, mood and cognition, all that stuff, that's not going to be on. And look at our kids with ADHD and autism. A lot of that has to do with how is our brain functioning.
Mm-hmm. I'm so fascinated by this. All I can think right now is like, I wonder if I can talk to her offline.
Yes, you can. I love that stuff. You tell I'm excited. I love it.
Anyhow, cracking up at myself. Okay. So here's a question that I have, because I really could keep talking to you for a long time. First off, we will put all of your contact information on the show notes that people, I think, are going to be like, I want to know more information.
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
And so we will put it all out there. We won't say it now, but basically
it's called Your Autism Game Plan. And that's where we are all on social media, is just if you search Your Autism Game Plan. I
like that. Everyone wants a game plan.
Yeah.
And so my question is, as a mom, you have essentially, I relate very much to how you've approached it, being like, okay, these are all the situations we have with my child. How can I support them? And you found a myriad, like so many different ways to support them. And I know actually I'm at this place where like, I know there's actually a lot more I could be doing. Like, so my son in the past has gotten cranial sacral therapy, which for anybody not knowing, it's manipulation of your sacral bones. You correct me if I'm wrong here.
The cranial. Yeah.
Cranial, not sacral is down below, right?
Mm-hmm. They do work there too. They work along the whole, the craniosacral, spectrum. Yeah.
So anyhow, I don't know much more about it than it's like amazing work.
Yes.
Like, these therapists like felt my son's head, and they could actually, without knowing and seeing his scans, they knew that there was a big vacant area in his brain. I was like, I'm sorry, that in the middle of his brain. I'm like, I'm sorry. That is amazing that
Yeah.
you could feel that from touching his head.
Wow.
Okay. That's not what that's not the point of this. The point is I've done a lot and at times we've done a gluten-free, dairy-free diet for him and we don't anymore because it's like I wasn't able to continue managing that along with his behaviors and his
Yep.
explosions around food and et cetera, et cetera. And so I guess the question that's coming up for me is how do we know that we're doing is enough for these children?
I don't have a good answer for that.
I was like, this is a hard question. It's me.
This is a hard question.
I guess let's talk about it because I think it's like there are never ending thing.
Yes.
What is it? There's never ending things we could do for these children.
Yeah.
Any child, really. But in specific to maybe help these children close some gaps. Because I think ultimately also what I hear you saying is like what you're working toward is not necessarily to fix this child, but to help this child reach their full potential of who they are, right? Because my understanding is autism is not going to go away. It's not a healable diagnosis. However, it's like if you have, I don't know, I can't think of a good analogy, but if you have something, let's just say like a physical disability where like, let's just say like you're missing a limb, the therapy or like getting a really good prosthetic leg is going to help you more than having some like a peg. I mean, I don't know. That's probably very offensive, but it's the best analogy I can come up with.
I'll forgive you for everyone out there. So I will admit at the beginning, when Sophie was first diagnosed, my goal was let's get her to the point where she no longer qualifies for an autism diagnosis.
I love it. Those overachiever perfectionist. Totally.
Oh, yes. And then I very quickly became depressed and anxious and super guilty and super frantic because I wasn't getting there as fast as I wanted to. And so do I think that some kids lose their autism diagnosis after this? Sometimes they do. Yep. But I think more often what I see, and I think a more realistic outcome or expectation is, like you said, to help them be the best version of themselves. There are a lot of proponents out there for neurodiversity and there's a whole movement out there where we're celebrating our neurodiversities. And I think that is great. I think that I don't celebrate my child's meltdowns and I don't celebrate the GI problems that these autistic kids have. I don't think that's worth celebrating, that they're constantly having, constipation or smearing their poop on the wall. Like, I don't think that's a neurodiversity to celebrate. Okay. And I think we can probably all agree on that. Now, in terms of neurodiversity, like you think differently than I think that's wonderful. But we have to be able to admit that there are certain struggles and certain things, quote, wrong when you have an autistic child. And those things are worth addressing and worth trying to either compensate for or fix or reduce, not only for us. It makes us as parents, it makes our life harder. But look at our kids. Do they enjoy having meltdowns? Do they enjoy being picky eaters? Do they enjoy having poor sleep? Do they enjoy being constipated or having diarrhea? There is no way. Don't tell me that is, synonymous with neurodiversity. So while I'm on board with supporting people who are, quote, neurodiverse, I also think that once people get especially kids get a diagnosis, ADHD or autism, whatever it is, a lot of times those medical needs get overlooked because, that's just part of autism. Autistic.
Oh my gosh, I could totally see that happening.
Autistic kids get constipated, so that's just part of, being autistic. No, it's not. If this were not an autistic child and they were constipated, pooping every week, you would absolutely work them up medically and see where you can help them and how you can help them to poop every day. So just because these kids are autistic does not mean that they don't deserve healing where healing is possible.
I love that last line, healing where healing is possible. Because I think as a coach, I think the thing that I study is standing into the possibility, like an invented future versus actually looking to the past at what's been done before. And I think when we look at these, and then just noticing, like, yeah, I can totally see how some of these children's medical needs would have been cast aside because we've now put a label on them
Yes.
and accepted them as normal.
Right.
And I think that's the thing. I think all of this requires us actually to really question what is normal, what
Yes.
is success, what, and I know for myself, I'm like, okay, like maybe the expectation, the assumed goal in life of living a long life,
Mm,
maybe that's not what success is going to look like for some of my people.
right.
Right. And so really looking outside of like what kind of what thoughts have been given to us and really kind of making them our own. I think what I hear from you is that like you're not willing just to be like, oh, this is just as good as it can get given what I've been told. You're going to be seeking and actually now seeking to inform others of what's available.
Yeah. I don't think I will ever be able to say, oh, she's as good as she's going to get. Would we do that with our typical kids? No,
Mm-mm.
we're always working on them. And I think it just takes that extra level in a child with special needs. It takes that extra oomph, that extra, I don't know, persistence and just tenacity of, and maybe that's just my personality, but like, I feel like that's kind of probably a mom thing in general of I want to help my child in the best way, in the most ways I can, while still also having balance in life. And that's definitely one thing that I did not do well before. Before this pandemic, we were in, just Sophie was in 40 hours a week of various therapies. And I was running my business. And I was trying to be a parent to two other kids. And I was trying to be a good wife and keep my house clean. That doesn't happen. And make sure the dishes are not in the sink. Like it was too much. So last March, when the world shut down, we kind of, we stopped all the therapies because they had closed. And it was kind of a good test to see, okay, well, were these therapies helping her get better, or were we kind of plateauing, which, we kind of suspected that we were, and they found out, yeah, we had kind of plateaued. And so the plan, that there is another lesson here, is that the plan at one time may not be the best plan at another time, both in terms of what's effective for the child and what fits with your life. You cannot let therapies overtake your life, because you are going to burn out. You're going to burn out.
I hear you. And I think that it's interesting kind of looking at the pandemic, at the pandemic and seeing how that affected kind of what we're doing for our kids. And I don't know why it made me think of, so my son's now in all the triennial evaluations, assessments to have our IEP, I think in a couple months. That has been the thing that's been kind of pushing me over the edge, as far as like, I had things pretty handled, but now managing all that, I'm like, oh my gosh. Okay. But what it made me think of is that in his physics, so he has PT as part of his IEP, and this particular PT, I mean, I think she's doing her job to her best ability, but she really wants to have a goal, or she's wanted in the past to have a goal of jumping.
Okay.
And I understand that, like, that's a good skill to have. But for me, I'm kind of like, okay, like we've been working at physical rehabilitation for 9 years.
Yeah.
We're not jumping. And I don't want to say we never will, but I'm just saying, I don't know that I want that to be the focus of his day at school. I'm thinking I'd rather see him having a good time on the playground with the body that he has at this point. And so, it's been interesting, really creating the discomfort in the IEP conversation of not aligning with the goals that they think my child should have. And I know we have to wrap up here, but I think really, I really appreciate everything that you have had to share.
Well, this has been such a good conversation. And from you being, a stranger at the beginning of this, I feel like we've identified and connected on so many, really deep and real levels. And I so appreciate the chance to share with you and your listeners.
Well, likewise, I know we really dove right in, and it was really fun. I'm like, wow, I of course prepare ideas for what I want to talk to somebody about in any interview, and none of the stuff that we talked about in the beginning was at all on my radar. And I really am thankful though for you allowing the conversation to flow like that. And again, I can't wait to seek some of your knowledge offline. And I really do encourage anybody that resonated with what you share to reach out to you, to get on that list so that they can have the most up-to-date information from you. And I just really, again, thank you for all that you're doing.
You're so welcome. I love it.
Was I right? Did you love that episode? And her voice is just amazing. I actually want to listen to it a lot more. I'm going to try to get her to start her own podcast. Don't you think that'd be a good idea? Anyhow, encourage her because I bet she will. She has a lot to share. And I want to make sure I put in two last things before we wrap up this episode. I know it was long, but I also know that every part of that conversation to me was so valuable. There's two things I ask of you. One, I haven't mentioned this in a while, and I would really love you to take just a couple minutes to rate and review this podcast. It just really helps other moms find it. For those of you who have taken a second to reach out to me, usually on Instagram, to tell me about how the podcast has impacted you, thank you. It absolutely makes my day, usually my week, because when I hear that my story or another mom's story has impacted somebody for good, I mean, how good does that feel? Okay, so the other thing I want to make sure you know about is you've heard me talk about the yet to be named group coaching program, which is now closed for enrollment. However, I will be opening up a new group and I want you to get on the wait list so that we can have the conversation, so that we can make it work for your schedule and that you can prepare for it. So still, please reach out and schedule a consult, which is the step to move into that direction of actually doing something to support yourself. Here's what I think is really interesting. The vast majority of moms that I talk to have done zero things to ever support themselves. Now, I'm not surprised and I totally get it. And I think it's really, really fascinating. And it's not that they haven't wanted to. They either haven't found the right thing for them or they haven't figured out how to make it work with their complicated life. So that's what I'm here for, to help you get over those obstacles and into some support so that you can have everything that you want in your life. That's going to wrap up our episode. Thank you so much. Share this with your friends. Thank you so much, guys. One more thing before we officially wrap up this show. Sometimes when I'm listening to podcasts, I have the experience of wanting more. I'm listening at the very end thinking, I sure wish that episode didn't end. I invite you, if you feel in any way the same way, I invite you to the Special Needs Mom podcast community, which is a free group that I host on Facebook, where we as a community of fellow moms who listen to this podcast and are experiencing life in similar shoes get to talk to one another, get to share stories, get to actually interact. I hope you'll consider joining. See you over there.